So let's get started. Hi, everyone. I'm here today with all of you for the second session of email newsletters with Tim Windsor. Thanks again, Tim, for doing this training for us. I just want to shout out a quick reminder to all of you. I sent over a document earlier today with some resources that'll help you out throughout the training. Tim, I'll be posting slides there and recordings, and there's also the information for joining the calls. Tim has, I saw a syllabus too that's linked there that has some more information from him, but if you have any questions at all, I will, or didn't get it, I'm going to share it in the chat once Tim gets started. And then just a reminder that the next call will be 2 weeks from today at the same time. All right, with that, I'm going to hand the mic to Tim, and we will get started.
Great, thanks a lot. And we have a lot to get through today, so I'm going to jump right in so we can get this moving. And are you, Mara, are we good with the slide there?
Yep, it looks great.
Excellent. Okay, so this is session 2, Better, More Effective Email Newsletters. And this is the one that talks about how to start up a newsletter quickly. And we're going to get to that. But first, I wanted to quickly do some follow-up since the last session. We've had a good number. I believe we had 14 office hour sessions, a wide range of items that people brought with them that they wanted to talk about. And I just wanted to call out a few of them. Because I think these are of interest probably to more people on the list in general, rather on this this webinar in general. The first thing was about list hygiene. How do you, once you've gotten a lot of subscribers and as you're moving along, how do you make sure that you've got active subscribers? And there are different ways to attack this, and we will focus on this in greater depth in a future session, but just real briefly, when you get your PDF of this back, you'll have the links will be in here. These are all MailChimp links. They're, your service provider may be slightly different, but everything works pretty much the same, which is you want to identify who your inactive subscribers are, and you need to define what that means. Haven't opened a newsletter in X number of sends. And instead of dumping them at that moment, what you want to do is you want to pull them into a re-engagement campaign. And that re-engagement campaign can be one or multiple emails to let them know that there's good stuff going on your newsletter. And if they don't activate soon, they may be dropped. And because we don't want to be filling up their email boxes, and you certainly don't want to carry the cost if you have a larger list of subscribers who aren't opening. And then ultimately, those people who don't respond positively to the re-engagement campaigns, then there are processes for removing them. Again, we'll get into a lot more depth on this later, but I share the links in case that's something that you, like one of the callers that I talked to in the past week, are wrestling with right now. The second thing that came up quite a bit was subscription growth. How you have a newsletter, how do you grow it? How do you make more people know about it? Again, everything we're going to talk about today has more detail coming in a future session. But a couple of nuggets that I think were really interesting here in the conversations. Number one, you want to put your promos where your readers are and where your most engaged readers are. And in many cases, that is at the very end of the article, an individual article, because if somebody's gotten that far in the article, they like what they saw, or at least we're engaging with it. And according to Tony Hale, who used to be with Chartbeat, he famously a couple years back posted that 66% of activity is actually happening on the bottom, or the bottom being past that first scroll of an article. So a good place to be for promos. As you think about them, it's great to have them at the top of the page as well, but putting them at the bottom and then tagging them to see how they're working. is a great strategy. And also someone I was talking with came up with a great idea that they had already incorporated into their system, which is straight out of Axios. Axios, at the end of some of their newsletters, has just a simple, at the bottom it says, was this forwarded to you? Sign up now to get Axios in your inbox. Ideally, we're going to have people forwarding your email newsletters, and this is a great way to get the recipients of that to sign up. And finally, I'm sorry, one more. Growing your opens. And so you've got the subscribers. How do you get them to open? How do you get your open rate up higher? There are a lot of different tactics, even on some of the highly automated newsletters. I know at least one of you is working with an RSS-driven newsletter. You can still get in and edit your subject line for an ongoing campaign. So if you set up a show the top stories in the past week, or all of the stories in the past week, before that is triggered to go out, you can change the subject line to be more specific to what you've got in there. And as we'll be seeing as we go forward, subject line is so important to the open rates. And finally, somebody clued me into a really cool resource. If you haven't heard about it, it's Facebook's Newsletter Nerds group. Just go into Facebook, search for Newsletter Nerds. It is a group that you have to apply for membership. It's very simple. Answer a couple of questions, and pretty rapidly you'll get approved. So if you want to kind of follow along on a different angle, there's a lot of people helping people on there, a lot of questions and answers. So that's follow up from where we were before. And really briefly before we get into this, last session, remember we talked about newsletters are a great way to grow audience and engagement. How do you get up and get started? You can't get focused on perfection. Think about the way the tech firms go after something. They get out what they call a minimal viable product. And we're looking at, in this session, the minimum viable product and the minimum viable email newsletter. Setting the goals for that, you got to have goals for anything that you're building, but these are really simple. The audience is your readers. The content strategy is recap the past week, and the content calendar is weekly highlights of what you've already published. This is a way to get started quickly in a new newsletter. I'm sorry, I got a little bit behind there on the slides. And the most important part of it is just getting going. If you don't have a newsletter and you want to have a newsletter, you can stand one up pretty rapidly, and I think you'll find some good tips in this session that you can take away is starting your minimal viable email newsletter. Just one quick aside to the others people in the room. They already have a newsletter. Yes, this session is all about starting a newsletter, but it doesn't have to be your first newsletter. This could be you could do an experiment on something you've been thinking about starting and use what we talk about here. And I think you'll find that some of what's discussed here will be relevant to rethinking parts of what you're already doing, whether you have one newsletter or 10 newsletters. So stick with it. I think it'll be worth it. And I hope to get going with this. So let's just dive right in. The minimal viable email newsletter, what is it? It is your call. It could be anything you want, but let's just put up some real guardrails here today to figure out what it would take to get one started. So it is an email newsletter. It is sent every week. It's a weekly on the same day. You pick the day. It could be a Monday. It could be a Friday. It could be a Wednesday. It doesn't matter. At this point, you're going to fine tune that later, but you want to get something out the door, so you don't want to get hung up on the details of what's the perfect day of the week to send an email newsletter. The structure, the content is going to be highly structured. You're going to have a lot of original. Half of your content in this newsletter is going to be original. But there's not a lot of content in this newsletter. There's not like you're going to be writing 5,000 words or even 1,000 words. And as we get into this, you'll see what I mean. Some of these are going to be copy that you'll write once and publish it over and over again until you decide you want to freshen it up. And 20% of it will just be pickups from your publication, whether that's an excerpt of an article or just some headlines of stories that you think are worth looking at. So let's get started with that. What will it take to actually make this happen? What tools are you going to need? You absolutely have to have an email newsletter creation and delivery service such as MailChimp. MailChimp is a great system to be using and is still free for the first 2,000 subscribers. So you won't have to worry about paying for this for a little while at least, unless you have just a runaway hit out of the gate. A text editor, and I always say a text editor rather than Microsoft Word or whatever your word processor of choice is. I find that sometimes Word and other heavier programs can put in extraneous code that gets in the way of newsletters. And I find myself, when people give me things, I have to clean up the text a bit. So a text editor, whether you're on Windows and WordPad or in Mac with TextEdit, or there are others that you may be using that are a little bit higher end, but it'll give you a nice clean product to put into MailChimp. And I do recommend writing the writing parts of it outside of MailChimp. I don't like writing directly into a web form because things happen, and you're less likely to lose things locally than if you are typing brand new copy into a service on the web and something goes wrong with your internet connection or any other number of little bumps. So write it in a text editor, paste it into your MailChimp or other management platform. Creativity, you got to have that. You already have that. You're good with that. And I would say 90 minutes per issue or even less. You can get a pretty decent first crack at a newsletter that is a whole lot better than not having a newsletter at all. And if you follow some of the things that I'm going to talk about here, it will actually be a pretty good newsletter. It's not just going to be slapped together. It's not just going to be automated from out of your RSS feed, but it's going to bring your personality and your publication's tone with it. So let's build it. Here's what you're going to have in your MVN. And again, you can change anything, but let's just pretend I get to rule the world for at least the next 10 minutes. And I'm going to tell you what's going to be in there and tell you why. First, you want to have a welcome from the editor. It's the last thing you write before you send. Each one of these we're going to spend a little time on. So I'm just going to run through this very quickly. Call out 2 or 3 great stories. Not just links, these are introductions. This is, as if you run into somebody, you want to tell them about your story. What would you tell them in 2 or 3 sentences to set them up so that they can jump into the story knowing why it's worth their time and what it's about. And then, link to a couple more, 2 to 4. You can go a little longer if you want, but I recommend keeping it tight. You don't want to overwhelm people when they open their email newsletter. You want them wanting more. And this is the piece that can be where you're picking up contents from your publication without having to write a whole lot around it. Requests for shares. Ask people who are getting this. You'll have your friends and family that you'll reach out to first to make sure that you have at least a decent base of newsletter subscribers. Ask people to share, and also ask them to support you. Direct them in the newsletter to the page on your site where they can learn more about how to support your efforts and what you're doing at your publication. So 5 quick things that are going to be in this first newsletter. Let's go through them one by one. So the 1 paragraph welcome, because this is the last thing you'll write, even though it's at the very top, it could be fresh. It can be the, you could even use this to say, here's the best of what we did in the past week. And also we're working on a great story, and then, how you tease it as deeply as you want, or as opaquely as you want, that will be published next week. So you'll be, this is, you literally could be sitting here 10 minutes before hitting send. So this is really, proof of life. You're holding up the newspaper for the photograph. You are writing this now, and it gives it a feeling of this is not just something that came through automatically. Oh, I'm sorry, I had two buttons. And as we talked about a little bit, touched on last week, it's your voice is critical to helping make that connection to your publication. The voice of the publication, the voice has its own tone, and you as the editor may certainly are going to echo that, but your voice is slightly different than your institutional voice. So make sure that you're connecting with your readers individually through this introduction. So the second part of it is, here are your lead stories. Here are the 2 to 3 great stories you want to talk about to your readers. These are not just links. Again, you take the time, write a couple paragraphs. I'm sorry, a paragraph, couple sentences, and you're telling them a story. You're setting it up, and if it helps to serve the story, grab an excerpt that is particularly telling about what they're going to find in there. It doesn't have to be long. Bloggers do a great job of this all the time, where they'll introduce something, they'll pick up a paragraph, and then they'll send you on your way to the story. At that point, they should have they've given you enough to know that this is something you want to look at, or maybe you'll skip to the next one. Give your readers the opportunity to have lots of ways to get into your publication, understanding that not all of them are going to connect with them, but at least 1 or 2 of them are, because you know your readers better than anybody else does. The links to 2 to 4 other stories are the kind of things that you see on down page on a news site. I've included this this little grab from BBC News. For years, I thought that they do a really great job of taking 4 to 8 words and creating a headline that is readable, that is understandable, that tells the story, and is SEO rich. SEO is not going to matter quite so much here in a newsletter, but we could all do worse than spend a little time with looking at how they write their headlines. And these are the ways, if you could see these, you figure these top 4 would be great links into your content to get people to understand what it is they're about to click into. And if you have to, rewrite them a little bit, rewrite them tight. And again, respecting the reader's time. They've asked to see this, but they haven't asked for you to take over the whole afternoon. Asking for shares is something that you'll be doing quite a bit, not just on your newsletter, but also on your site. And you want to actively ask people to forward the email to people who might be interested in it. Forward a link if they don't feel comfortable sending the whole email. But I think we've all found incredible newsletters just because somebody has sent it to us, and it never hurts to ask. So this is the 4th piece of it. You can also consider some paid promotion on Facebook, and you can also go onto social and request more direct support. These are probably, as you get more into it, you want to make sure you're launched and comfortable with the cadence of putting out your newsletter. But remember, you're trying to keep it tight. You're trying to keep it to 90 minutes. You're working with what was already created last week. You're putting a fresh face on it, and you're using that opportunity to connect with your users and your readers. And the final piece of that is that request for support. you don't want to ever have a communication directly with a reader without at least giving them the opportunity to know that you're a nonprofit site and you depend on the support of readers to continue doing what you're doing. And they have subscribed. They like what you're doing. A lot of them love what you're doing. They don't want to see it go away. And the worst thing that could ever happen is for your site to go away and afterwards to have your readers say, if only I knew, I would have supported you. So always include that in your newsletter. This is the kind of thing that you can write in advance, or write 2 or 3 of them so that you're not repeating the same thing every time. But it's not something that you're going to need to be putting in a lot of time on a weekly basis to pull that together. And then one final incredibly important step is just make sure you're CAN spam compliant. This is the federal law that, among other things, requires that there is an easy to find unsubscribe link, and that you honor that unsubscribe link, and that you don't send unsolicited regular email or subscription emails to people without them opting in. There are lots of other nuances to the law. Some of you may be more familiar with it than not. The important thing to know is that you don't need to know this. MailChimp, any reputable email newsletter service is going to take care of this for you on the back end. I would strongly recommend that you never send an email newsletter through your internal email service. You will get flagged, and it's highly likely that you could bring your email system down and bring it offline for some time while you work out all the spam reports that people may find. If you really feel like you got to do it yourself, or better, if you just want to know more about CAN spam, I have included a link to an FTC site that has a very readable but very in-depth guide to what you need to be aware of. I'm going to take a pause here. Mara, do we have questions queuing up? I feel like I've been running through this so that there wasn't an obvious break point, but this is, and we're getting close.
Yeah, no, there are no questions right now. If anyone has any, let us know in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, there will be more. Yeah, we'll be getting to that point again soon. But just to really briefly go back, let's see if I can just jump without jumping through all of these. To bring that back around again. And this is something, again, just do a dry run and see how close you can get to 90 minutes, even on the first one. And it's only going to get faster. You have the, in writing this in inverse order, I would say. You start at the bottom, write your request for support, have that in the can ready to go. Write your request for shares, have that in the can ready to go. That's the one you might want to include some more fresh examples. If you say, if you like the story above about, please be sure to share this newsletter. Your links to 2 to 4 other stories, and your decision on what the 2 or 3 big stories are going to be happening at the same time. You're going to decide what those 4 to 7 stories look like, where they break down. You can make your links once you've decided what the breakpoint is. Then you can write your intros to the stories that you really want people to see. You can include images with that from the stories or not. I think images are great to have in a newsletter. Not everyone's going to see them because not everyone has their images turned on. But your fans who have asked to see this newsletter are probably going to turn them on for you. And they will, the images will make the stories tell themselves that much better. And then finally, you're writing your welcome. You're checking your lists. You're making sure everybody's up to date, and you're hitting send. So, that's how that all comes together. And
we have a quick question here. Do you have a moment?
Absolutely.
Caroline asks, besides people asking to add you to their address book, are there other ways to keep emails from getting pushes to the promotions tab in Gmail, for example?
Getting into the promotions tab in Gmail is this really, they're very good about knowing where mail is coming from, and they're going to put you in there at first. Um, part of the ask when we're asking people to share, the other thing is you can promote something to the inbox when you get it. So as a user, if I get something that comes to my promotions tab that I want to make sure that I see when it comes in, I can promote that to the inbox. So we can. And that's a great point. Let's ask people if they like the newsletter to promote it to the inbox, and then. Sorry, I'm trying to walk and chew gum here. We that's an excellent question, and but there's nothing programmatically that can be done to just otherwise everybody would do it, and we wouldn't be talking about this. So it's I'm sorry, Gmail's very good about getting people into that. And the recipient can be really great about getting themselves out. They just have to click that button. I'll send, and if you don't know how that works, I will send. I will make sure that in the follow up we send just kind of a quick how-to, because it's literally just clicking the button on the story on the piece of mail. Mark, anything else while we're? Because I'm asking.
I have one other question. Yeah, I have one more question here. Do you have a sec for that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Any thoughts on sending a newsletter from a do not reply email address versus sending it from an info at or personal email address?
I'm sorry. I'm. It
So
broke up in the middle. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Any thoughts on sending a newsletter from a do not reply email address versus sending it from an info at or personal email address?
I don't like do not reply email addresses because it just seems hostile, the name. So when you set it up with your email provider, your from that they see is something you can customize. So it can come from whatever whatever address you want to set it up as. And I think it's if it can come from the editor. It can come from info at. It can come from mail at. I'm sorry, newsletter at. You can try whatever you like. I always like to see email that comes into me from a subscription that comes from a person. It's I know it's stupid because I know it's coming from a bot, but seeing a person whose name I recognize or get to recognize over time makes it definitely feel more personal coming in. But I would not go with the do not reply, because you do want them to reply also. That's the other thing, is if you set it up properly and somebody just hits reply, you'll get that. You'll get that. You'll be able to access that email, because that's just more input. Are we good?
Yep, that's it for now.
Okay, I'm going to slow down a little bit. I realized that my presentation clock actually started long before we opened the doors, and I thought we were running out of time, and we're not. So this is great. We're going to have more questions at the end. So think of what you might want to quiz me on from earlier in the presentation. But questions you also want to ask yourself as you create that first newsletter, or as you think about extending your line and maybe not wanting to put too much effort into it until you know whether there's interest for it. Is this taking longer than you thought? Is it, Tim said it would be 90 minutes and it took us 4 hours. Where are those time issues coming in? What do you try to think about as you do your first couple? Where your time is going, and is that something that it's happening for for good reason, or you're just taking your time on something. Are there ways to, are there roadblocks to getting just the plain old structure of the page, putting the links together? There are a lot of reasons it could take longer. I still think there are ways to cut the time down, and maybe that's something as you have individual questions, and I don't expect you'll put this newsletter together in the next 3 or 4 days. But as you think about it, sign up for the sessions for next week, for the one-on-one sessions, and we can talk through some of the specifics of why things might take longer. Go, I hear it.
Do you suggest creating a template that allows you to fill in the blanks?
We could, and I think there definitely will be a template. I keep saying this. This is there are a lot of moving parts to this 8-part series. But one whole session is about identifying great templates and building with them. So there'll be a lot more around that. If you're thinking of, sometimes you can just fill out a form. You can build yourself a form where you answer questions for yourself, and it turns that into the newsletter. That's certainly one way to do it. This feels a little bit more handcrafted than that, but whatever works for you is what works for you. So there are tools that are separate from email newsletters. I don't know whether MailChimp itself or others like MailChimp have this kind of a form-based approach, but I've built things like that with just using outside tools that can even something as simple as Google Forms, where you build yourself and it puts it into a spreadsheet for you, and then you just copy the text out. But when you get through all that, it just seems easier to just do it in a text editor for me. But that's whatever is best for your way of working is the best way to put this together. The ultimate goal is to have a great newsletter that people love to read. And to that point, thinking about what are some other newsletters that you look at? What are the ones that you love to open, that you're happy to see when they show up in your inbox? What is it about them that you love? If it's lots and lots and lots and lots of stories and links, that's not probably going to work for this one. But what is it about the top of that particularly long newsletter that gets your attention? Or if it's other types, is the style? Is it the way it attacks a problem or a topic that you particularly like? Steal ideas. Think about what someone has done and use it as inspiration for applying a similar approach or an opposite approach, depending on how you feel about what they've done, to the way you tell your story. And think about this as you're building it. How will you let people know your newsletter exists? And again, I'm a big fan. If you have a subscription count of 1, because you always have 1, because that's you. How do you get to those first 50 or 100? I would reach out and individually to people I know that I think care about the topic area, and ask them to subscribe and to also share it when they get their first issue. But you definitely have this other wonderful tool that a lot of people who are starting newsletters don't have, which is the site that already has an audience. And start thinking about the different ways that you might want to promote it on the site, and where you might want to promote it on the site, and what does that look like? If this is your first newsletter, that's you're where you put it on the site's pretty simple. It's a page that talks about what the newsletter is. Here's where you sign up. Here's the form. Thank you, and we'll be back in touch. If you're adding a newsletter, I talked to somebody about the desire to build different landing pages for each of the newsletters that they had, and I think they had like 7 or 8. And I think that's a great idea, because somebody who is interested in a particular newsletter doesn't want to get to a page that has all your newsletters necessarily as the first thing they see. They want to realize that you you interpreted their behavior properly and gave them a page that's about the newsletter they're interested in. Tell them about what they're going to get, give them the opportunity to sign up, and then say, and we have these others. I think that places that do it that way have a much better opportunity for promoting the newsletter. And also, there's a page that you can point different people to, so that it's very clear which page they've landed on. And then, what I'm asking here as we come to the end of this whirlwind session is, what else? What is on your mind as you think about building this kind of a very tightly focused newsletter to try to get you into the newsletter business, or to expand your brand into a line extension. So we could talk about some of these things here because we have some time in this session. We can also talk individually next week. As I say, we had 14 people who took advantage last week because we were nobody actually got in on Monday, but you'll be getting the this link. But if you don't get this newsletter soon enough, the signups are open at calendly.com/Windsor Digital/INN2, and sign up for your session. What I found is every time I logged in, I got a completely different conversation. But all I found was that there are a lot of you out there that are incredibly passionate about getting this thing done right, and there are no limits on what we can talk about, and some things will end with a need for follow-up as well. Sometimes it's just an information gathering. One of the pieces that I shared at the beginning about how do you update your subject line on an automated newsletter came from a conversation. And so bring your very nutsy boltsy conversations to these sessions, and we will get through this. And for those of you who aren't starting a newsletter and aren't looking to extend right now, bring any questions that you have about anything having to do with email newsletters for your publication, and we will just dive right into it. So all this information is in here. I think it's limited to 4 per day, so I think we can get 20 sessions in over the course of the next week. And I tried to make the hours that are available for these as wide as possible. Some days are wide open, some are a little more tightly scheduled. Let me play it back on that one. So Mara, anybody else queuing in with questions?
Oh yeah. All right, let's see what we have. Do you have any thoughts on having multiple links / calls to action in a single newsletter? We currently have a newsletter that in parentheses that takes more than 90 minutes to put together, that highlights 3 stories with original text and includes not just links to each story, but also Facebook and Twitter share icons to share each story. Is that overkill?
No, I think it's great. So, and especially if you have, if this is something you're already doing on the website and you've got the systems in place, absolutely include that. The call to action is share this, please, or click on the story and read it and then share it. I don't think having multiple social share icons is multiple calls to action. It's giving people as many opportunities as possible to share the content.
Okay, and then we have a comment from Ken Martin. Most newsletters are way too long, so I don't read them. And a follow-up that says, how much info is too much info in a newsletter?
Well, I come from the less is more camp here, and I think that going back to well, let me answer the question directly, then I have another thought. So directly, what I'm recommending here, I think, is a good size newsletter. It's it gives you something, some meaty things to look at. It gives you some other links. It talks about the organization, and it's something that if I actually got in my email inbox and read top to bottom, would take me less than 5 minutes to read. And I think that that's and much less than 5 minutes if I'm a skimmer, which I am. So I think this is the, to me, this is a great length for a newsletter. That's not to say long newsletters aren't good as well. I subscribe to a bunch of long newsletters. I read the CNN piece that Brian sends out every night about media news, and it goes on forever. I never get to the bottom of it, but it's unless it's a single. Sometimes he'll do a single topic dive. It's something different for everybody, and I think that there could be a session here for what if we if you want to do a really long newsletter because you think you have a lot of content to share, what would that look like? There's nothing wrong with it. I just think this is an ideal length. The other thing you might want to look at is Axios.com. Just the way they do stories is a great education towards how to communicate in a brief medium like a newsletter. They take very often very deep stories and boil them down to what are the basics, what's changed, what do I need to care about, what should I be looking for? They're doing the service of journalism, of saying, I know you don't have enough time to catch up with all this stuff. We do. It's what we do, and we're going to make it easy for you to be on top of it. And that's what this newsletter does too, in many ways. So I'm a fan of short, for sure. Nora?
Sorry, I'm in the INN office. Something came up. I'm sorry. What's the best way to get subscribers to an existing newsletter? Oh, what's the best way to get subscribers to an existing newsletter to subscribe to a new newsletter? So I think for second newsletters.
Right. Well, you have a great medium for them, right? So you've got your newsletter. You want to put that information at the top. You don't want to bury it at the bottom to say, also we have a new newsletter. What often happens, and I see this more in the world of podcasting, is there's an introduction to the new newsletter or to the new podcast from another podcast that you may already be subscribed to, and they'll hand it off and say, and here's the first episode. I think you could do the same thing with a newsletter. We think this might be something that you really is really good for you, and here it is. After the break, here's the newsletter, and here's how to subscribe to it. So I think that platform is really good. Of course, your website, excuse me, is another way to do that. And I would say that's the strongest way to launch a new newsletter is with your existing base. Great. And also, I knew there was something else I wanted to say about this. And think about your subject line as well. How to get within your limited number of characters. How to get the message in there that greetings from me, who you already know. I'm going to introduce you to something you don't know about that you're going to love. And don't be afraid of feeling like you're marketing a little bit, because you are.
Got it. What's your best advice in terms of frequency of the newsletter?
The frequency of the newsletter, the one we're talking about here, is weekly. The frequency of any newsletter is what it needs. So if you feel like you absolutely need to have a daily newsletter because things are happening so fast in the topic that you're covering, then you need a daily newsletter. There are newsletters that come out multiple times a day. And there are some that come less frequently than weekly, but I think it's really hard to get people used to. You can go every other week, but beyond that, it starts to, if you do a monthly newsletter, people will forget that they opened one 29 days ago when your new one comes in. So I don't think you get the benefit of that regular presence in the inbox of people getting used to seeing you. And that's why, this one, originally we had talked about, well, let's take the pressure off, make it a bi-weekly, every other week newsletter. But I think it needs to be weekly, just especially when you're trying to build presence for something that's new.
So you kind of answered this before, but just to ask briefly again, how long should it take a reader to read my newsletter? 5 minutes, 10, or less than that?
I think under 5 and under is a not including the story that they may click out to, because that could be a 10-20 minute story if it's a big investigative piece. But the newsletter itself should be something that you can breeze through in 30 seconds and get a sense of what it is. And if you read every word on the page, it should not take you more than 4 or 5 minutes to be able to read it for what we're doing here. If it's again, I am not here to trash longer newsletters. I am here to praise shorter ones.
Cool. If you are a small operation and produce maybe only one story per week, do you recommend aggregating stories and links from other relevant news sources in the newsletter, or should you wait on the weekly newsletter until you can produce more original content?
I think it all depends again. Are you already gathering that aggregated content as just the natural course of being the expert on the topic, and you've already done the work? So as you're going through next week and you've decided you're going to aggregate that for your readers, you just flag things that you think are interesting. But if you have to sit down and actually make that, it may not be worth your effort. But I do believe that there's a value in creating a sense that you may have one story a week that's original, but you are the expert in that topic area, and you are the person that the reader can trust to filter out all the noise and just bring the best stuff. I think that's definitely a strategy. I did talk to somebody last week who had taken that path, but wasn't seeing a lot of engagement with the aggregation. So it's kind of hit or miss, but I think it's worth pursuing if it's not going to take you a lot of time. And it's certainly a way to get in front of people on a more frequent basis as you build the quantity of what you're releasing going forward.
Cool. What's a good click rate? Martin's asking.
So the click rate, I don't have that screen open. Let's see. Yeah, I really don't have that open. I even closed Excel before the session. So I looked at in MailChimp, and I'm actually going to next week. I need to talk with Fran about how we want to release this back to the group. But everybody took the survey. We took the information from that survey and put it against some MailChimp industry comparisons, and looked at media, looked at government, and looked at nonprofits, and also looked at the top category for open, for click, and for unsubscribe. And the top for open and click was hobbies, and but a lot of the newsletters that you all are doing right now are actually doing better than the best rates that are on MailChimp. But I think a good open in this industry is 25%. A good click rate is 4%. And a good unsubscribe is under 1%. So if you're seeing that, then if you're hitting on all of those, if you're outperforming them, your focus is going to be on how can you incrementally make them better. But one of the things I hope we can come back with is come back to everybody who took the survey and say this looks like it looks like your open rate is great, but your click rate's a little low. What can we do to help you think through what are some things you could do to increase the click rate, those kinds of things. So a lot of good data that we got from people taking the surveys, and if you haven't, please do. It will really help. And then we're going to look at looking at the Shorenstein data as well, the baseline. How do we index? How does each individual site newsletter index against that? And these are when you think about, oh great, 25%, I'm at 26, so I'm beating that. These are all news sites or all government sites, and that includes the great ones and the horrible ones. So that's just an average. We can always do a whole lot better than the average. And there are all kinds of dials that we can turn and help you turn on. When your open rate is all about the subject line. That's the best thing. That's the that's certainly the most prominent dial that you can turn. Your click rate is how easy do you make it for people once they've opened it to understand what you're about, what you have there, and not feel overwhelmed. I believe. Make some choices for them ahead of time. Maybe not so more anymore, but Apple used to do a great job on this with computers. You didn't have 10 computers to choose from; you had 3. You had 3 phones to choose from, so it made it a lot easier to get through that first place where you're just looking at a lot of information. So you're going to be hearing more about that probably in the next session, because I really do want to dive down individually with the different sites with some ideas on which areas to focus on based on what you've reported as your subscription number, your open rate, and your click rate.
Tracy asks, if it's a weekly newsletter, does it need to come out at the same time each week? And if we're starting a second newsletter, do you have a recommendation on spacing them apart?
Okay, so on the first question, yes, it should always come out the same day of the week, as much as you can possibly make that happen. There are always, there's always going to be a reason why sometimes you're going to miss that deadline, but consistency is important. Pick a day and stick to it. Also know that Monday is going to be a holiday 10 days a year. So you maybe don't want to send things out on a holiday. People may not be, they may be subscribed to their work email and may not see it. So, that really leaves you 4 days a week, unless you have something, that is purely about the weekend, and maybe it makes a lot of sense to send it on the weekend. But you're thinking about weekdays, what are the best ones? A lot of people like Mondays or Tuesdays because it gives you a chance to both look back and look ahead. But I would definitely stick to that. As for spacing them, it all depends on how much overlap you have in your subscription base. If there's not a lot of overlap, I wouldn't worry about whether or not they're both coming out on the same day. If you do, yeah, you want to put a little bit of air between them so that people can sense it. So if you got if 30% say of one newsletter also subscribes to the second newsletter, then put at least 1 day between them, so that it has the chance to stand on its own and not get lost in the shadow of the other newsletter.
Is it worth doing A/B testing on a newsletter with fewer than 5,000 subscribers?
Well, also, again, it depends on what you're A/B testing. I think the best A/B test is on probably on subject lines, and if you've got the time to do that, go ahead and do that. it's just you've got to run an A/B test for a while. You can't do it for 1 week and determine what's the winner. And you really have to think through, okay, so what are we A/B testing? Are we A/B testing putting someone's name in to the subject line, the recipient's first name, versus not putting it in? Or are we testing, a conversational voice versus an institutional voice? Kind of set up the parameters of what you need an answer to, and keep it simple. Keep it only A/B. I know that you can do multivariate testing as well, but for something of to your point of not a lot of not a lot of numbers to work with, 5,000. You want to keep it pretty tight, and be prepared to run it for 3 or 4 newsletters before you get some really actionable information. Don't get stuck on the first one. And if you'd like to talk about that, I'd love to dive deeper into that on one of the calls. Mara, are you still there?
That's all the questions I have right now from attendees.
Okay.
If you have any last minute questions, please don't hesitate to get them in the chat. But great questions so far with what everyone's asked.
And I love when they're very specific like that, all of them. Please do sign up. Sign-ups are there. They're working now. For all I know, you filled them all the slots already. But I think you'll find out we get a lot out of them. And sometimes I'm even riding in a car for that true excitement of watching the frozen wasteland of Iowa go by behind me. A lot of fun. So look forward to seeing everybody at the next session 2 weeks from today, and in between talking to the 20 of you or more if we could squeeze more in. So thanks Mara, for fielding all the questions for me as I get used to your system here, and I can't wait to get to the next topic.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. And just a reminder, I put in the chat a little earlier the INN event evaluation. If you don't mind filling that out, it is super helpful. It is super helpful to us. And I put the link to the calendar calendar for Tim in there as well. Yep, I don't have anything else.
And just remember that calendar link is going to change every week, and it's not too hard to figure out what it will be in future weeks. Just so that it makes it so that you absolutely get to the right calendar signups. That's all.
Great. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.